The girl in our story grew up in a small town, living a simple life with her family. They weren't rich by any means. Her parents worked hard to make ends meet, but their home was always filled with love and laughter. She learned early on that happiness didn't come from fancy cars or designer clothes, but from the little things: shared meals, late-night talks, and dreams whispered under the stars. From the time she was young, she had big aspirations. While other kids played games after school, she spent hours sketching designs, creating posters for school events, and dreaming of one day becoming an artist. Her teachers noticed her talent and encouraged her to pursue it further. But when she graduated high school, reality hit hard. Art wasn't exactly a field where you could easily land a stable job, especially not in her small town. So instead of chasing lofty dreams right away, she decided to take the practical route. She moved to the city, rented a tiny apartment, and started working 2 jobs, one as a barista at a local cafe, and another as a part-time graphic designer for a startup. It wasn't glamorous and some days felt downright exhausting, but she never lost sight of her goal. Every penny she saved went toward building her portfolio, and every free moment was spent learning new skills online. Slowly but surely, her work began gaining attention. People liked her unique style, bold yet warm, professional yet personal. Word spread, and soon she was getting more clients than she could handle. One evening, while attending a local art exhibit, hosted by a friend, something unexpected happened. A man walked into the gallery, a tall, well-dressed figure who stood out among the crowd. He wasn't just anyone. He was one of those people everyone seemed to know about, someone whose name often appeared in newspapers and magazines. Yet, unlike others who carried themselves with arrogance, there was a quiet humility about him. When their paths crossed during the event, they struck up a conversation. Surprisingly, they clicked instantly. What started as casual chats over coffee turned into long walks through the park, deep conversations about life, and eventually, a relationship neither of them saw coming. For her, it wasn't his wealth or status that drew her in. It was his kindness, his curiosity about the world, and the way he made her feel valued. And for him, it was her authenticity, her passion for art, and the joy she brought into his otherwise busy life. Their romance blossomed quickly, and within 2 years, they were standing side by side exchanging vows in front of friends and family. Their wedding was a beautiful blend of simplicity and elegance, reflecting both of their worlds. On that day, she stepped into a life she'd never imagined for herself, a life filled with luxury, opportunities, and experiences beyond anything she'd ever known. But even as she embraced this new chapter, she vowed to stay grounded, to remember where she came from, and to hold on to the values that shaped her. Little did she know, this decision, to stay true to herself, would become crucial in the months to come. Because no matter how much money or fame surrounded her, the challenges of fitting into a completely different world would test her in ways she couldn't predict. Life changed dramatically after the wedding. Suddenly, she found herself living in a world that felt like it belonged in movies. Luxurious penthouses with breathtaking views, invitations to exclusive events, and closets filled with designer outfits she never thought she'd own. At first, everything seemed magical. She traveled to places she'd only seen in books, dined at restaurants where chefs were treated like celebrities, and mingled with people whose names often appeared in headlines. But as time went on, she realized that this glamorous lifestyle came with its own set of challenges. The biggest challenge? Fitting in. No matter how kind or genuine she tried to be, there were always whispers behind her back. Some people didn't bother hiding their disapproval. They openly questioned how someone from such humble beginnings ended up marrying into one of the wealthiest families in the city. She must have been lucky, some said. Others speculated about ulterior motives, implying she had married for money rather than love. These comments stung, but what hurt even more was the way some treated her, as if she didn't belong. At charity galas and high society gatherings, she noticed subtle slights. Conversations would pause when she approached, laughter would fade, and eyes would follow her every move. It wasn't uncommon for people to talk down to her, assuming she wouldn't understand topics like investments, art auctions, or international politics. Once, during a dinner party, someone asked her what she did before meeting her husband. When she mentioned her work as a graphic designer, the woman across the table raised an eyebrow and said, "Oh, how quaint." The comment lingered in her mind long after the evening ended. Despite these moments, she refused to let negativity define her experience. Instead, she threw herself into making a difference. She joined charitable organizations focused on causes close to her heart: education for underprivileged children, support for aspiring artists, and initiatives to help women build careers in creative fields. Her husband admired her dedication and encouraged her efforts, often accompanying her to events and meetings. Together, they made a great team, balancing each other's strengths and supporting one another through thick and thin. But no matter how much good she did, some people still couldn't see past her background. There were times when she wondered if she'd ever truly earn their respect. Was it worth trying so hard to fit into a world that seemed determined to keep her out? Late at night, lying awake beside her sleeping husband, she wrestled with doubts. Had she abandoned parts of herself in pursuit of acceptance? Would she ever feel fully comfortable in this new life? Still, she pressed on, determined not to let anyone dim her light. She reminded herself why she had started this journey in the first place, not for wealth or status, but because she loved him deeply and believed in the life they were building together. And while the road wasn't always smooth, she clung to the hope that things would get better with time. After all, hadn't she overcome obstacles before? Growing up, she'd learned to adapt, to persevere, and to find beauty in unexpected places. Surely she could do the same now. One thing kept her going: the knowledge that her husband saw her for who she truly was. He never once made her feel inferior or out of place. In fact, he often praised her resilience and marveled at how gracefully she handled difficult situations. "You're stronger than you think," he'd tell her whenever she doubted herself. His unwavering belief in her gave her the courage to keep moving forward, even on days when the weight of judgment felt unbearable. As months passed, she began carving out her own space in this unfamiliar world. She surrounded herself with people who appreciated her for who she was: friends from her old life, colleagues from her design work, and a few trusted individuals from her husband's circle who genuinely respected her. Slowly, she built a support system that helped her navigate the complexities of her new reality. Though the journey was far from easy, she discovered something important along the way. True belonging doesn't come from fitting in. It comes from staying true to yourself, no matter where life takes you. And yet, despite her growing confidence, she couldn't shake the feeling that one day, she'd face a moment that would test everything she'd worked so hard to achieve. That moment was closer than she realized, and when it arrived, it would force her to confront not just the opinions of others, but her own sense of self-worth. It was supposed to be a normal afternoon, a quick trip to pick up something nice for an upcoming event. She had heard about this boutique from some of the women in her husband's circle. It was one of those places where you needed an appointment just to step inside, and even then, not everyone got the green light. The store was known for catering to the elite: designer dresses, custom jewelry, and accessories that cost more than most people made in a year. But she wasn't there to impress anyone. She just wanted to find something simple yet elegant, something that would make her feel confident without screaming for attention. When she walked in, the atmosphere hit her immediately. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume, and the lighting was soft, almost too perfect. Everything was arranged meticulously, like a museum exhibit rather than a shop. She glanced around, taking it all in, but no one came forward to greet her. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes staff were busy helping other customers, so she waited, browsing quietly, running her fingers over the smooth fabrics and admiring the intricate details of the pieces on display. After several minutes, a sales associate finally approached her. The woman's smile was polite, but there was something distant about it, like she was sizing her up before deciding whether or not she was worth her time. "Can I help you with anything?" the associate asked, her tone clipped as if she already knew the answer. "I'm looking for something for an evening event," she replied, trying to sound casual despite feeling slightly out of place. Maybe a dress? Something understated, but classic. The associate nodded, though her expression didn't change. "Let me show you what we have," she said, leading her toward a rack of gowns. But instead of offering suggestions or asking questions to narrow down options, the woman seemed distracted, barely acknowledging her presence. When she pulled out a few dresses and held them up, the associate barely glanced at them, muttering vague comments like, "That might work," or "This is popular right now." She tried to stay patient, reminding herself that maybe the woman was having a bad day. But as the minutes ticked by, the dismissive attitude became harder to ignore. Every question she asked was met with short, unenthusiastic answers. When she requested a different size or asked for advice on styling, the associate sighed audibly as if she were being inconvenienced. Finally, after what felt like forever, she decided she'd had enough. None of the dresses felt right anyway, not because of how they looked, but because of how the entire experience made her feel. Small, unimportant, like she didn't belong. She thanked the associate politely, set the dress she'd been holding back on the rack, and turned to leave. As she reached the door, she couldn't help overhearing two employees chatting behind the counter. "Did you see her?" One of them whispered, loud enough for her to catch. "She clearly doesn't shop here often, probably just wasting our time." Her heart sank. She froze for a moment, debating whether to turn around and confront them, but pride kept her feet moving. Instead, she pushed open the glass door and stepped outside, blinking back tears. The bright sunlight did little to lift her mood. All she could think about was how wrong they were and how much their words hurt anyway. Standing on the sidewalk, she replayed the scene in her mind. Why did it bother her so much? She knew who she was, where she came from, and what she stood for. None of that changed because of a snide comment or a rude salesperson. And yet the sting lingered. Maybe it was because deep down she still carried a tiny seed of doubt, a fear that perhaps just maybe they were right. That no matter how hard she tried, she'd always be seen as the outsider looking in. As she stood there lost in thought, clouds began gathering overhead. Within minutes the sky darkened and raindrops started falling, splashing against the pavement. She hadn't brought an umbrella, and within seconds her clothes were soaked. Her hair clung to her face, mascara streaking down her cheeks, not from the rain, but from the tears she couldn't hold back anymore. Alone, drenched and humiliated, she wondered why she even bothered trying to fit into a world that seemed determined to push her away. But then, just as she thought things couldn't get worse, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out, opening the rear door with practiced precision. And when the person inside emerged, her breath caught in her throat. Could this really be happening? Or was this just another twist in a day full of surprises? The sight of the familiar figure stepping out of the car felt surreal, like something out of a movie. For a moment, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. But there he was, her husband standing under the gray sky, his sharp suit somehow still looking impeccable despite the rain starting to pick up. He scanned the area quickly before spotting her, and when he did, his expression shifted instantly, from calm to deeply concerned. "Are you okay?" he asked, rushing over to where she stood. His voice was soft but urgent, cutting through the sound of the raindrops hitting the pavement. Without waiting for an answer, he shrugged off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth of the fabric and the gesture itself was comforting, but it wasn't enough to stop the flood of emotions swirling inside her. She shook her head slightly, unable to find the words to explain what had happened. How could she tell him about the boutique, the rude salespeople, the whispered comments that cut deeper than they should have? She didn't want to seem weak or petty, especially not to him. After all, he'd always seen her as strong, capable, someone who could handle anything life threw at her. Admitting that she'd been hurt by something so trivial felt embarrassing. But he didn't push her to talk right away. Instead, he gently guided her toward the car, shielding her from the rain with his body. Once they were both safely inside, The driver closed the door behind them, sealing out the cold and noise. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was quiet, almost too quiet, and for a few seconds neither of them spoke. She stared out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, while he watched her, his brow furrowed with worry. Finally, he broke the silence. "What happened?" he asked again, this time more gently. There was no judgment in his tone, just genuine concern. She hesitated, chewing on her lip as she debated whether to brush it off or tell him the truth. In the end, honesty won out. "It's stupid," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I went into that boutique downtown, the one everyone talks about, and—" She trailed off, unsure how to continue. Talking about it made her feel small all over again, like reliving the whole experience in vivid detail. He waited patiently, giving her space to gather her thoughts. When she finally mustered the courage to explain, the words tumbled out faster than she intended. She told him about the sales associate's dismissive attitude, the lack of effort to help her find something suitable, and the cruel comment she'd overheard as she left. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face again, mixing with the rainwater still clinging to her skin. To her surprise, he didn't try to minimize what had happened or tell her to let it go. Instead, his jaw tightened, and a flicker of anger flashed across his face. Not at her, but at the people who had treated her so poorly. "You don't deserve that," he said firmly, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "No one does." For the first time since leaving the boutique, she felt a glimmer of relief. Hearing him say those words, simple as they were, made her realize that maybe she hadn't imagined the weight of the situation. Maybe it was wrong, and maybe she had been treated unfairly, and most importantly, maybe it was okay to feel upset about it. As the car drove them back home, he reached over and took her hand in his, squeezing it lightly. "We'll fix this," he promised, his tone resolute. "You shouldn't have to deal with that kind of disrespect, not today, not ever." She nodded, though part of her wondered what he meant by fixing it. What could he possibly do to change what had already happened? Still, his confidence was contagious, and for the first time in hours she allowed herself to feel a tiny spark of hope. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone in this. And sometimes, having someone stand beside you is all it takes to turn a bad day into a chance for redemption. Little did she know, the events of the next hour would leave her feeling empowered in ways she couldn't have anticipated. When the car pulled up outside the boutique again, she was caught off guard. "Wait, what are we doing here?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion and a hint of hesitation. The last thing she wanted was to step back into that place, where the memory of humiliation still lingered like a bad smell, but her husband simply gave her a reassuring smile as he opened the car door. "Trust me," he said, his tone calm but firm. There was no room for argument in his voice, just quiet determination. She didn't fully understand what he had planned, but something about the way he carried himself, his confidence, his focus, made her feel safe enough to follow him. So reluctantly, she stepped out of the car, pulling the edges of his coat tighter around her shoulders as if it could shield her from the storm of emotions brewing inside. As they walked toward the entrance, she noticed heads turning. People, passing by, stopped to glance at the sleek black Rolls-Royce parked at the curb, curiosity sparking in their eyes. Even the doorman seemed to straighten up a bit when he saw who was approaching. Inside, the boutique buzzed with its usual air of exclusivity, but this time, the atmosphere shifted almost immediately upon their arrival. Her husband strode in like he owned the place, his presence commanding attention without saying a word. Employees who had been chatting casually moments earlier suddenly snapped to attention, their expressions shifting from indifference to wide-eyed alertness. One of them, a manager, judging by the clipboard in hand, hurried over, a nervous smile plastered across his face. "Good afternoon, sir. How may we assist you today?" the man asked, his tone overly polite, bordering on desperate. Clearly, he recognized her husband and knew exactly how much influence he held. Without missing a beat, her husband cut straight to the point. "My wife visited your store earlier today," he began, his voice steady but carrying an edge that demanded respect. She was treated poorly, disrespectfully even. I expect an explanation. The manager's smile faltered, and for a split second, panic flickered in his eyes. He glanced between her and her husband, clearly scrambling to piece together what had happened. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that," he stammered, glancing around as if hoping someone else would jump in and save him. "Could you please tell me more? We take customer service very seriously here." Her husband raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by the rehearsed apology. "I think my wife should explain," he said, stepping aside slightly to give her space to speak. All eyes turned to her, and for a moment she felt that same wave of insecurity wash over her, the fear of being judged, of not being taken seriously. But then she remembered why they were there. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for herself, for the values she believed in, and for anyone else who might have been treated the same way. Taking a deep breath, she recounted the events of earlier that day, the dismissive attitude of the sales associate, the lack of assistance, the whispered comment that had cut so deeply. As she spoke, she kept her voice steady, refusing to let herself be intimidated. To her surprise, the words came easier than she expected. Maybe it was the support of having her husband beside her, or maybe it was the realization that she deserved better. Either way, she stood tall, meeting the manager's gaze head-on. By the time she finished, the room was silent. The manager looked mortified, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he fumbled for a response. "Ma'am, I can't express how sorry I am for this experience," he said, his voice trembling. "That is absolutely unacceptable behavior, and I assure you, it won't happen again." But her husband wasn't satisfied with empty promises. "An apology isn't enough," he said sharply. "This kind of treatment reflects poorly not only on your staff but on your entire establishment. What steps will you take to ensure this doesn't happen again?" The manager hesitated, clearly unprepared for such a direct challenge. Finally, he nodded and promised to implement sensitivity training for all employees, along with stricter policies to prevent similar incidents in the future. He even offered complimentary items as a gesture of goodwill, though her husband politely declined. "We're not here for freebies," he said firmly. "We're here because everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from." As they left the boutique, she couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph mixed with relief. For once she hadn't backed down. She hadn't let others define her worth or make her feel small. And while the victory might seem small to some, to her, it felt monumental. It was proof that standing up for yourself, even in the face of fear, could lead to change. Later, sitting in the car as they drove away, she turned to her husband, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know if I could have done that without you." He smiled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "You already did," he replied. "All I did was remind you of what you're capable of." And for the first time in a long while, she truly believed it. The drive back home was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt heavy or awkward. Instead, it was peaceful, like the calm after a storm. She leaned her head against the seat, replaying everything that had just happened in her mind. The boutique, the confrontation, the way her husband stood firmly by her side. It all felt surreal, like something out of a movie. But it wasn't fiction. It was real life. And she had faced it head on. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel small or invisible. She felt seen, valued, respected. When they arrived at their apartment, he helped her out of the car, his hand steady on hers as if to remind her that she wasn't alone. They walked inside together, shedding the remnants of the day, the dampness from the rain, the tension from the boutique, the weight of judgment. Once they were settled in the living room, he handed her a warm cup of tea and sat down beside her. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly, his eyes searching hers for any sign of lingering distress. She took a sip of the tea, letting its warmth spread through her chest before answering. "Better," she admitted with a small smile. "Honestly, I didn't think I'd ever go back there, but standing up for myself, it felt good, like I finally took control of something I couldn't before. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's because you did. People will always have opinions, some fair, some not, but the only thing you can control is how you respond. And today, you showed them exactly who you are, strong, dignified, and unshakable. His words sank in slowly, filling her with a sense of pride she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't about proving anything to others. It was about proving something to herself. She realized that no matter where she came from, or what anyone said about her, she had value. Her worth wasn't tied to designer labels, expensive cars, or social status. It came from within, from the kindness she showed others, the hard work she put into everything she did, and the resilience she carried with her every single day. Over the next few days, she found herself reflecting on the experience more than she expected. It wasn't just about the boutique incident anymore. It was about the bigger picture. How many times had she let other people's opinions shape how she saw herself? How often had she doubted her place in this new world, wondering if she truly belonged? Those questions used to weigh her down, but now they felt lighter somehow, as though confronting the situation had given her clarity. One evening, while flipping through old sketches she'd saved over the years, inspiration struck. She remembered how much joy art had brought her when she was younger, how creating something beautiful made her feel alive. In the whirlwind of adapting to her new life, she'd set aside her passion for design, focusing instead on fitting in and keeping up appearances. But now, sitting surrounded by memories of her past, she realized she didn't need to choose between being authentic and embracing her current reality. She could blend both worlds to honor her roots while stepping confidently into the future. With renewed energy, she started sketching again. At first, it was just for fun, doodles here and there, ideas scribbled onto scraps of paper. But soon, those ideas grew into something bigger. She envisioned a project that would combine her love for art with her desire to give back to the community. What if she created a space where aspiring artists could showcase their work? A studio that celebrated creativity without pretense, where everyone felt welcome regardless of background or experience? Excited by the idea, she shared it with her husband one night over dinner. His eyes lit up immediately. "That sounds incredible," he said, his enthusiasm genuine. "You've always had a talent for bringing people together. This could be your chance to inspire others the way you've inspired me." Encouraged by his support, she began working on turning her vision into reality. She reached out to friends from her old neighborhood, connected with local artists, and even consulted with professionals in the industry. Every step of the process reminded her of why she fell in love with art in the first place. Not for fame or money, but for the joy of creating something meaningful. Along the way, she also rediscovered parts of herself she thought she'd lost. The girl who dreamed big, who believed in possibilities, who refused to let fear hold her back. As plans for the studio came together, she noticed a shift in how she carried herself. She walked taller, spoke with more confidence, and stopped worrying so much about what others thought. Sure, there were. The day of the studio's grand opening finally arrived, and she woke up with a mix of excitement and nerves buzzing through her. It was hard to believe that just months ago, she had been sitting in a cafe sketching rough ideas on napkins, unsure if anyone would take her seriously. Now, standing in front of the space she'd poured her heart into, it felt surreal. The walls were painted a warm cream color, adorned with artwork from local creators. Strings of fairy lights twinkled overhead, casting a soft glow across the room. In one corner, easels stood ready for visitors to try their hand at painting. In another, shelves displayed handmade crafts available for purchase. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her dress as she glanced around the room one last time. Everything was perfect, or as close to perfect as it could be. Friends, family, and strangers alike began trickling in, filling the space with laughter and chatter. Some were people she'd known for years, while others were complete strangers who had heard about the event online or through word of mouth. Watching them interact with the art, admire the pieces, and share stories about their own creative journeys filled her with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in ages. Her husband arrived shortly after things got underway, his presence instantly calming her jittery nerves. He moved through the crowd effortlessly, chatting with guests and complimenting artists on their work. When he finally made his way back to her, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "This is amazing," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You've created something truly special here." She smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Do you think so? I was worried no one would come. Or worse, that they'd hate it." He chuckled softly. "Look around you," he replied, gesturing toward the lively scene unfolding before them. "Does this look like failure to you?" She followed his gaze, taking in the vibrant energy of the room. Children laughed as they painted colorful swirls on blank canvases. Adults exchanged business cards discussing potential collaborations. Even the quietest corners buzzed with conversation. No, this didn't feel like failure. This felt like success, not because of the turnout or the compliments, but because she had stayed true to herself. She hadn't tried to recreate someone else's vision or conform to expectations. She had built something authentic, something that reflected her values and passions. As the evening wore on, she found herself stepping away from the crowd for a moment, needing a breather amidst the whirlwind of emotions. She slipped outside onto the small balcony attached to the studio, leaning against the railing as she looked out over the city skyline. Lights twinkled in the distance, cars zipping along streets below. For a moment, she let herself absorb the enormity of what she had accomplished. Opening the studio wasn't just about art. It was about proving to herself that she could navigate two worlds without losing sight of who she was. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mind if I join you?" Her husband stepped outside holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. She shook her head, making room for him beside her. They stood there in comfortable silence for a few minutes, sipping their drinks and enjoying the cool night air. "I've been thinking," he said eventually, breaking the quiet, "about everything we've been through lately. The boutique, the studio, all of it. You've changed, you know." She raised an eyebrow, curious. "Changed how?" "You're stronger," he explained. "More confident. Not that you weren't before, but now you carry yourself differently, like nothing can shake you." She thought about his words, letting them sink in. He was right. She did feel different. The doubts that once plagued her mind seemed quieter now, replaced by a steady belief in her abilities. She realized that confidence wasn't something you were born with. It was something you built, piece by piece, through experiences both good and bad. And every challenge she'd faced, from rude salespeople to judgmental whispers, had helped shape her into the person she was today. "I guess I learned that I don't need validation from other people," she admitted. "Not really. What matters most is knowing who I am and staying true to that no matter what." Her husband nodded, a proud smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's exactly it. And honestly, that's what makes you extraordinary." They stayed, outside a little longer, talking about the future and dreaming up new ideas for the studio. By the time they went back inside, the party was winding down. Guests lingered, reluctant to leave, while volunteers began cleaning up. She thanked everyone, personally, hugging old friends and shaking hands with new ones. As the last guest departed, she locked the door behind them and turned to survey the empty studio. It was messy now, tables cluttered with half-empty cups, paint smudges on the floor, but it was beautiful. Every stain, every fingerprint, told a story. It was proof that people had gathered here, shared moments, and created memories. And that was worth more than any amount of perfection. Later that night, lying in bed beside her husband, she replayed the day in her mind. Despite the exhaustion settling into her bones, she couldn't stop smiling. This was just the beginning, she realized. There would be challenges ahead, of course, moments when self-doubt crept back in, or when the weight of expectations felt overwhelming. But she knew she could handle them, because she had already proven to herself that she was capable of far more than she ever imagined. And as sleep finally claimed her, she drifted off with a single thought echoing in her mind. I belong here. The weeks following the studio's Campo opening were a whirlwind of activity. Word spread quickly about the unique space she had created, a place where art wasn't just displayed but celebrated, where creativity felt accessible to everyone regardless of background or experience. Local newspapers wrote glowing reviews, calling it a breath of fresh air in a city often criticized for being exclusive and out of touch. Social media buzzed with photos of visitors painting, sketching, and laughing together. People came from all over, artists looking for inspiration, parents seeking activities for their kids, even tourists curious about this new cultural hotspot. But amid the excitement, she made sure to stay grounded. Every morning before heading to the studio, she took a few moments to sit by the window with a cup of tea, reflecting on how far she'd come. The journey hadn't been easy. There were days when self-doubt crept back in, whispering that maybe she wasn't cut out for this after all. Yet each time those thoughts surfaced, she reminded herself of one simple truth. Growth doesn't happen without challenges, and every hurdle she'd faced had only made her stronger. One afternoon, as she was tidying up the studio, an elderly woman walked in, leaning heavily on a cane. Her eyes scanned the room slowly, taking in the vibrant artwork and bustling energy. Something about her demeanor caught her attention. There was a quiet grace about her, a sense of wisdom that seemed to fill the space around her. Curious, she approached the woman with a warm smile. "Welcome," she said gently. "Is there anything I can help you with?" The woman nodded, her gaze softening. "I heard about your studio from a friend. They told me it's a special place, a place where people feel welcome." She paused, glancing around again. "I used to paint, years ago before life got busy. But seeing this, it makes me want to pick up a brush again." Her heart swelled at the comment. This was exactly why she had started the studio, not just to showcase art, but to inspire others to reconnect with their own creativity. "We have everything you need right here," she replied, gesturing toward the supplies set up in the corner. "Why don't you give it a try? No pressure, no judgment, just fun." The woman hesitated for a moment, then smiled faintly. "All right. Maybe it's time I stopped letting fear hold me back." Watching the woman settle into a chair and begin dabbling with colors, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about moments like these, tiny sparks of courage reignited in someone who thought they'd lost them forever. That evening, as she closed up the studio, she realized something important. Success wasn't measured by accolades or numbers. It was measured by impact, the way you touched lives, including your own. As months passed, the studio became more than just a workspace. It became a community. Artists gathered regularly for workshops and critique sessions, sharing tips and encouragement. Families brought their children for weekend classes, fostering a love for creativity early on. Even local businesses started collaborating, hosting events and fundraisers within the space. What began as a personal dream had transformed into something much bigger, a beacon of hope and connection in a fast-paced, often isolating world. Through it all, she continued to grow. She learned to embrace both sides of herself, the ambitious designer who thrived in high-stakes environments and the humble artist who found joy in simplicity. She stopped worrying about fitting into anyone else's mold, instead focusing on building a life that reflected her values. Her husband remained her biggest cheerleader, always reminding her of how proud he was of everything she'd achieved. Together, they navigated the ups and downs, supporting each other through thick and thin. Looking back on her journey, she couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed, and yet, how much had stayed the same. She still loved designing. Still cherished late-night conversations over cups of tea, still believed in the power of kindness and authenticity. The difference now was that